Hey, what's up, guys? Ken here, and I hope that everyone's doing good out there. Now, besides retro toys, I'm also a huge fan and collector of comic books, pretty much since the time that I was about 11 years old. Now, these days, I run both the Retro Toy and Comic Escapades pages online, where we have sales of retro toys and comic books taking place. Now, I do want to spend some time on the channel here making videos dedicated to the love and interest in comic book collecting. And while I'm talking and while I'm going through my thoughts, I'm also going to be going through my comic book collection and bagging and boarding some comic books while I'm talking. So, in fact, if you're listening to this, I recommend that maybe you could do the same. You could just have this playing in the background while you're sorting through your comic book collections. Okay, in today's video, I just wanted to talk about the divide that sometimes exists between being a comic book collector and a comic book seller. Now, I think that in those early days of comic book collecting for me, sometime between the years of 1988 to the year 2000, I would not have considered myself a collector in the sense that we understand the term today. Now, I'm based in Malaysia and I lived through all of my childhood and teenhood in a very small town located hundreds of miles away from the main city center of Kuala Lumpur. Now, even back then, in the late 80s to the early 90s, there were comic book hobby shops in a city like Kuala Lumpur that specialized in bringing in comics from DC and Marvel. And I think that the most prominent of these was the Mind Shop. Yeah, the Mind Shop was the premier brand for comic book hobby stores in Malaysia in the 1980s onwards. I mean, in those days, you could get comics from the newsagent and even a neighborhood store every once in a while. But the Mind Shop, man, that place was the real deal. It was an entire store dedicated just to comic books. In fact, at one time in the late 80s, they even organized a trip to Kuala Lumpur by Todd McFarlane. Yeah, this was when McFarlane was just starting out on the Amazing Spider-Man books, and coincidentally, I had started reading those two after receiving a copy as a Christmas present when I was about 11. And man, you know what? I remember reading about that Todd McFarlane appearance in the papers and just wishing that I could have been in the big city to see Todd McFarlane. But if you grew up with a comic shop around you and you enjoyed comics and had the funds to get into the hobby, you basically would have had all that you needed to get started with your collection. But if you were in a small town and with very limited distribution of books, you basically would have to just get your hands on whatever was available. Now, I started out on the Amazing Spider-Man and Captain America books back in the late 80s. And I pretty much followed the runs on these books all the way through my teenhood and up to the point that I finished school. Now, I stayed on these books particularly because I loved the writing team of David Michelinie on Amazing Spider-Man and Mark Grunwald on Captain America. I think that these guys really nailed the essence of what these characters were for the era. And even if you went back today and you read those runs again, a lot of it holds up really well. Can I just say the return of the Sinister Six and the Bloodstone Hunt? Classic comic book fans, you know what I'm talking about. Now, when I finished college and started working and getting my own income, I had moved to the big city, and the place that I was staying at the time had a comic shop within walking distance. Could you believe that? My first order of business obviously was to get a subscription so that the shop owner, who was this great and fantastically knowledgeable lady who was running the place, she would be able to hold my books every month so that I would never miss an issue. Now, pretty soon, I was buying just about everything that caught my interest. You could say that I was even beginning to hoard books. But then, we started getting things like eBay and high-speed broadband kicking into high gear. And after you applied for a credit card, you could pretty much buy books from all over the world. Yeah, you could get on auctions, you could buy other people's private collections that they were letting go of. You could get all these back issues that you missed out on as a kid. Now, the sky was the limit. Now, some people might have given up eventually and got out of the hobby and moved on to other things. Some others have never stopped in the last 30 to 40 years, and you see their homes being converted into something like storage warehouses with boxes and boxes of old comics. Some of them have even been able to stay on in their marriages without their wives walking out on them or kicking them out of the house. Yeah. Um, okay, now there's very few that have actually been able to move on from collecting, into the world of comic book sales and trading. For me, I reached a point where I felt that it would not be realistically possible for me to hold on to every single comic book that I had accumulated over some 20 years or so, and still continue buying new books every other week or so. Now, there had to be a point where the hobby became something else. And then I thought about those people that, actually ran the comic book and toy shops themselves. I mean, it's a business to them, but they actually love the products that they're dealing with and selling as well. Maybe not every single thing, but at least 70 to 80% of it, they must have a certain connection to the things that they're selling. Now, they have to watch these items that they love being sold off into someone else's hands practically every day. They have to see the things that they enjoy leaving them every day. And then I got to thinking that, maybe it's enough to just be around most of these books and toys for a certain amount of time, to see them, to hold them, and to read them, and then pass them off or spread them out to other collectors out there. And that's the point where I started the Retro Comic Escapades sales page on Facebook something like 6 years ago, so that I can start letting go of books in my collection to other collectors, and also to start a genuinely effective sales and trading community where I could come into contact with other comic book fans and collectors, sell and trade books, and just build up a more engaging environment in which comic books can be shared, enjoyed, and discussed and dissected by everyone. Now, this is still a goal, okay? This is still very much a goal. And we have a very small community of collectors here in Malaysia, and it can be bigger, okay? The comic book collecting environment can be a lot bigger. So there are some who are strictly comic book collectors. They collect and they never sell their collections. Now, the concept of selling their books is something that they will never agree to, okay? Never, okay? They would ward you off like you were an evil entity from Dormammu's realm, okay? If you were to even suggest selling off their books. But then there are some collectors who are sellers now, okay? And I may be a seller when it comes to the Retro Comic Escapades sales platform, but at the end of the day, when all is said and done, I'm still a collector first. Okay, so I love to hear your thoughts. Okay, your thoughts and your comments on this. I know a lot of you guys out there are, you're all collectors, and some of you guys are even sellers too. Okay, some of you guys collect and then you sell your books after a period of time. I just like to hear from you guys, and that's it for me for today. Okay, if you stayed on through the entire video, thanks for your time. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed the content, and you know what? I'll catch you guys again real soon. Thank you.